Welcome back to the Leader You're Becoming podcast. I am your host, Coach T, and we are on episode number 8, y'all. Welcome back. I'm so excited to be here. We are going to talk about a real serious topic today, right? They're all serious, in my opinion, but one that could truly derail the business if not done properly. And we're going to talk about a concept called managerial courage today. And why this topic is so important is I learned about this concept when I was running an 8-figure dealership years ago. And it was actually one of the core competencies of the general manager role. And when I first saw it, as I was being judged on it, right, as a part of a competency that I needed to demonstrate, I really looked at that and I said, wow, managerial courage, like what does that mean? Like how does that show up each and every day? And throughout my years, I've learned and seen how this one competency actually undermines so much success and growth and scalability opportunities within the business. It also just absolutely can derail a business if managers do not have or possess this competency, or they do not operate, better said, with this competency at the highest level. And so one of the things as I was thinking about it and I was like putting my notes together, I always like to have my notes, right? I realized that managerial courage in that moment in time, and why it hit so hard for me, was I'm a natural optimist, right? I typically can see the best in everything, right? And that works very well in my favor, right? I can see the good in people, I can see the beauty in almost everything, right? And then if given enough time, I can find beauty in it. Even if the beauty is, this is so horrible, if I just did the exact opposite, then I would be successful, or I could benefit from this, which makes this beautiful now. Right? That's optimism right there in front of you. And but being a natural optimist, what that does is at times, especially early on at this time in my career as a leader, right, running this very dynamic business where there were new employees, we opened a new dealership in a new market with new employees who had never even been in the industry before, with a clientele base who's never had the type of product that we were delivering to them, right? And so it was one of those situations where there was a lot of complexity, and my optimism was really needed, right, with all this complexity. But optimism at that time in my career also allowed me, if you will, to look past issues that were growing in this complex environment. And when I say look past issues, it would be, you know what? I've addressed it, or maybe I didn't address it, and I think this can sort itself out, right? And I remember early on in my career, I would see something and I would say, this seems like it could be an issue, like I'm kind of watching it, but you know what? I think this can kind of work itself out. And that was just my assessment based on the data points that I had, what I was seeing, what was going on, the people involved, the situation involved. I was kind of like, you know what? I think this one, it doesn't require me to come in, right? Because if I come in as the boss, right, I'm the general manager. If I come in now, things have to get moving and they have to get shaking and shuffling. And I was trying to allow space for something without needing to try to jump from thing to thing to thing. I'm trying to prioritize. And what I found was that sometimes, that is the moment. But more often than not, what presented as lack of courage to deal with something, which was really an attempt to let things work itself out, actually presented itself and came back as a low competency from my standpoint of looking at it now years later, of managerial courage around the situation. And so that's one of those things where, if we look at it, and we talk about this a lot from this podcast, right? Which, from that garden lens, and that garden lens it's like weeds starting to grow up in that garden, right? On this podcast, the Leader You Become podcast, we get excited we look at it from a garden perspective oftentimes. And this is like seeing a weed and assuming, it's hot outside, the sun's going to burn that weed up. Now, that might be true. That might be true, right? It might be true where the weed is, comes up and it pops out and it dies. But if you know anything about gardeners, right? At least my dad, he loved the art of gardening, and my stepmom, she would out there be physically doing it, and they would be researching stuff about it all the time. And you see those weeds, you better pull the weeds up. Right now, you have to be thoughtful about how you pull the weeds up, et cetera, depending on the type of plant it's growing around. I'm not going to get into all that. I don't have a green thumb. But at the end of the day, if you're seeing some weeds pop up, it is your responsibility to say, hey, I see weeds here. There might be a bigger issue. It could be nothing, but it could be something, right? And in that garden, this is where you would start to navigate and pull those weeds up. And so as a manager, oftentimes we see these things. We see something going, right? And we kind of are like, I think it might be okay, right? I might be okay. But in reality, in a garden, it's just like a garden. You got to get that weed out of there. Now, with that being said, right? And so this is where I got introduced to this concept. And so Harvard Business Review actually defines managerial courage. They call it, I pause for a second because they call it courageous leadership, right? Different terminology, same thing. And I want to read what it says here. It says, courage is acting in service of a meaningful purpose, even when fear or discomfort is present. I'll say it again. Harvard Business Review looks at courageous leadership, which translated managerial courage for this conversation, right? Courage is acting in service of a meaningful purpose, even when fear or discomfort is present. Now, that does not mean fear is not there. It's in the midst of that fear, even when it's there, even when discomfort is there, even when ambiguity is there or uncertainty is there. It is acting in service of a meaningful purpose. Now, I think it's very key that they use the phrase meaningful purpose. I do think sometimes managers do not deal with situations, and I'm going to say managers and leaders here, right? And we'll just use leaders because we're becoming leaders here, right? Leaders sometimes do not deal with things because they themselves do not believe it's a meaningful purpose. A lot of leaders are in roles where they're entrusted and they actually don't believe in the company. They actually don't believe in the vision, if anything. They don't believe in the direction that it's going. And I'm just going to take a moment here, right, because I'm feeling led to say this. If you do find yourself in that situation, you have to, as my good friend Mr. Masters would say, poop or get off the pot, right? And I don't say that flippantly. I mean, if it is going in a way that you fundamentally don't believe in, and you can't find the reason and your why within that, I am encouraging you, for the sake of your team, to look for another position, look for another opportunity, right? Because to deal with issues, how we're talking about dealing with issues, it has to be a meaningful purpose for you and me. It has to be meaningful, because courage, this leadership, this courageous leadership, this managerial courage, right, as we're using that term, it requires a meaningful purpose, right? And that meaningful purpose may not be the exact vision. It might be the meaningful purpose of your team, the situation, the dynamics of the client experience. So you got to find some meaningful purpose. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely difficult, not impossible, but it becomes extremely difficult to be able to have the courage necessary to go deal with a situation that has so much ambiguity, so much discomfort, so much uncertainty, so much like your job could be on the line if you make the wrong decision. And that would alone can cause you to say, I think I'm cool. I think I'm cool in this moment, in this situation. And so I really, really feel it in my spirit today. Please find your meaning, because you find your meaning, right? Once you find that meaning, that courage becomes a lot more accessible in that moment. And I believe everybody has it. It becomes more accessible. So with that being said, right, you have to address it. You have to. And so I have a very simple framework that I like to use, right? Simple to understand, hard to do. Because I personally, when I first started this, and I get into number one, right? You have to be curious, right? And in the leadership role, I, as an optimist, always saw the good. I always tried to come back around to the good. I also wanted people to like me, right? Anybody that says like I don't want anybody to like me is lying. They're human. Everybody needs somebody. You may not need a lot of people to like you, but you want somebody to like you. And if you saying that, I mean, there's some medication out there for you. And I'm just totally joking, right? But no, in all honesty, right? Like everybody, as human beings, we want people to like us, right? And we would hope a lot of people like us, or at least enough people that we deem necessary to like us. And as a leader, your job is not to be liked. Your job's not to be liked, right? Now, it helps when you are liked, it helps a lot. But our job as leaders is to run our companies, run our organizations, especially if you're the owner of the business, right? Is to run these businesses in a way that creates an exceptional experience and solves a problem for the client, creates a remarkable experience for people living and working within their vision of themselves, within the bigger vision of the company, right? At the end of the day. Like that's what we're really doing. It's just humans helping humans. And then when those two things are true, then usually a company produces profit. And then as the owner or as the leaders, we share in that profit, right? Depending on how we're paid. If we're the owners of the business, naturally we share in that profit, right? Or long term, we put profits back to create more enterprise value, and then we'll share in the the profit later on, what have you. And so it is so critical that as we understand, that component of it, we really have to address and make sure that we are just locking in on this, taking the moments when it comes up in our business of going right after it as far as if there's issues in the business. Right? We have a desire, we have a care, and we're going right after the issues in our business. Now, the framework that I like to use, number one, is curiosity, right? I believe that courage starts with curiosity. Now, I'll say chapter one, the intro to the book, it starts with meaningful purpose, right? But if you're there, that's like before the book even starts, right? Like, why am I reading this book in the first place, if you will? Chapter one of this book would be curiosity, right? Like, what do I need to do? How does curiosity shows up? Curiosity shows up with questions. Now, it doesn't show up with questions like with the purpose like a lawyer would question, right? These leading questions because I'm trying to walk you down the path to say what I need you to say so I can prove my case. No, but true curiosity, what that might look like. What are these questions that may sound like, right? What's actually happening here might be a question that you may ask, to yourself and to others sometimes. Who are the people involved, right? What are the risks if this continues, right? What happens if we act? What happens if we do nothing? As a leader, you first have to be curious. You have to be absolutely curious because it allows you to investigate the situation early before it grows into a bigger problem. And I'm talking about, like I said, man, I looked over there, I'm just saying, and I heard the team member saying XYZ to the client. Now, it's not exactly incorrect information, but it could, but how they said it, it could be misread. Now, I understood what said employee means because I understand the playbook and what we trained. But is that really clear to the client, right? Now, I could leave that situation alone and say, well, I understood what he mean, and probably the client probably understood it as well and move on. Or I can go to that employee and say, hey, look, I heard you say X, Y, and Z to the client. I understood clearly. But I can also see how from the client's perspective, not knowing our business, not knowing our product, not knowing our company, not knowing anything in this new environment, it could lead potentially to be unclear. So, hey, let's tighten up our verbiage and don't say this or say this instead. Or what else could you say if you want you want to take a more collaborative approach, right? What could you have said differently to ensure or to increase the probability that the client truly understands what you're saying and what we're offering, right? That is the difference. Like, that is something in that moment where you can go over and make that adjustment with that team member at that point in time. What I have done before is heard it, assumed that it might be well, and then guess who I got a call from? A client. I got a call from the client, like, right? And I was confused. This person said this, and that's not true. And I'm like, I knew that could happen. I knew it could, and it did, right? And I was right there. I saw it, and I saw, but there was ambiguity. It was discomfort. There was uncertainty, like maybe they might, maybe they won't. I understood it, maybe they would. Some people could understand it, and now I got to go back to an employee and be like, I heard it, but now the client's complaining, right? And rather than saying it on the front end, and then let's say that client did call back, right? Because it did happen. And now that employee can look back and be like, oh, wow, you did say that. I can see how that is. I've already made that correction. Compared to letting it go, how many other people did they end up talking to? And then how many other potential complaints do I have along the way that maybe people are about to say or didn't say, and they're quietly complaining, which is the most dangerous complaints, right? As a leader, one thing I have learned, quiet complaints kill more than loud complaints. Because loud complaints you can deal with. You can work through, solve, apologize, move on from, build the bridge again. Quiet complaints you never knew happened. There's still a gap. There's no bridge. Can't build a bridge that you don't, if you didn't know there was even a gap. So this is something else to think about. So number one, being curious, right, along the way. Number two is say what needs to be said. Now, this is good because I'm being very, very vulnerable here today, right, as we do on this podcast, right, the leader you're becoming. I used to not have a problem saying something. Right? I gave an example just now of where I didn't say something, right? And what that looks like, right? It's an evolution. Then I'm like, you know what? No, I got to start saying something, right? Well, as I start saying something, what I started doing as an optimist was I started softening the blow when I said it. And what do I mean by that is I already knew that the employee, if they make a mistake or something happens or they get a complaint, right? I already knew that most people are hurt by it. They're already frustrated that they made a mistake. They're naturally in fear mode. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to get written up? I lose money, my family, people start going down these spirals, right? We all do it, right? And so knowing that people generally already were hurting because they made a mistake or they made a bad decision that did not produce the return on investment that they said it would, I didn't want to add. I didn't want to add any more weight to that, right? I didn't want to pile on. And so what I often would do was I would soften it, right? I would soften the communication of what happened. And softening can be, hey, look, this situation happened. They're like, oh man, that sucks. I made a mistake. Oh man, I'm so sorry, etc. I'm like, hey man, it's okay. It's all cool, right? Now, that might be true. Don't get me wrong. That might be true, right? And yes, it is all cool at the end of the day. Like, there's very few things we can't recover from. Right now, if somebody dies or something like that, then obviously, like, they can't recover from that. They've passed on, right? But most of the things that we do and have done have not been that extreme, right? They haven't been that extreme. And so, and so as you think about it, yes, by saying, hey, it's okay, softening the blow, at times what it does is it actually takes away the severity of the moment. That does require, right? That is required. The client experience is important. That might seem meaningless to us, or not meaningless. It may seem like, how do I want to say, it might not be that big of a deal because we see it all the time. But that might be their only experience, or that one experience every 5 or 10 years, right? And in that experience, look, we don't know what else trauma it's created in their own house, or in their, relationships because of the situation. And if we don't understand the gravity and the weight that could be behind what seems to be nothing for us, right? We see it all the time. It's a quick fix. Hey, my bad. It actually is a really big thing for them. And as a leader, if we don't allow that to have its place, right? The severity of what seems to be a small mistake or a big mistake, right? It doesn't really matter here, right? If we don't allow that to sit, then that can create create a lack of clarity around the seriousness of, like, we can't make this mistake again, or we must reduce the number of times we make said mistake, right? And so this is how this stuff shows up. And then what happens is, when it doesn't show up, when we try, how do I want to say this? When we try in an attempt of trying not to pile on, we actually remove the necessary ingredients for it to sit there, right? It is not our responsibility. And I had to I don't say teach myself, I had to come to this realization. It is not my responsibility to carry the emotion of my team, right? I, as the leader, did not do the thing that got us here. And so as the leader, it is my responsibility to state the facts, the data, what client experience was had, or what team member experience was had, what impact did it have to the business, right, to the team, correct the action, show what the right future looks like. And if you, as the team member, right, have a emotional response, that's on you, right, as a team member. That doesn't mean I don't care, but you're human. You have a right to have emotional response. It is not my responsibility to carry your emotion for you. It's not my responsibility to try to help you reduce your emotion, right? It's not my responsibility for that. If you choose to have it, right, it's your body, your choice, right? Then if that's the case, then guess what? That's not on me. And as a leader, like, this was one of those things that I really had to learn how to navigate through, right? Because I really did want to be liked. I'm optimistic. I want to be liked. And I also was not trying to have the lesson lost because of somebody's emotional, response. But what I learned was, if they allow their own emotion to lose the message, that wasn't on me. That was on them. And oftentimes, managerial courage comes down to step one, being curious, and then step two, saying what needs to be said. And allowing the employee, that team member, the other leader, whoever, to hold it. And that's their stuff, to hold. They did it. They did the action. So we're here because of what they did or what they didn't do. So let it just be that. Now, number 3, right? With that being said, number 3, there is a proper way, I do believe, to show that, hey, how do I want to say this? It is a proper way to show that you can care about the person while still protecting the standard. And I wrote that down. I want to make sure I said it correctly. Number 3 would be what I like to call closing the loop. I got that from one of my leaders when I was first running the dealership. Actually, I think it was my second boss running that dealership. And he said, did you close the loop on these conversations? Like, I would go in, I would have the conversation. Like I said, even at that time, I was trying to bring it down, but people had emotions, right? And then he would come back and say, did you close the loop? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, did you close the loop? What are you talking about? He's like, you said they reacted emotionally. Like, they reacted, right? They had a strong emotion response. Yep. Well, what'd you do? I said, well, we dealt with it there, and then that was it. He's like, do you think they're done with it? And I'm like, well, I thought I was done with it. I thought we were done with the conversation, right? He's like, you got to go close the loop. Make sure you close the loop, right? And what it did was, it showed you care, right? You don't have to do it in that moment. That moment is the corrective conversation, the courage to have that corrective conversation. Later, we come back now and we close the loop. Hey, I know this was a hard conversation yesterday. I know it was. It was very difficult. How are you processing it? Again, you heard what I said. How are you processing it? I didn't say, are you okay? Even though I'm implying, are you okay? But this is you still got to own that. You still have to take accountability for that. but I'm here because I saw the reaction, or I saw no reaction, and I'm now just want to make sure we're good, right? There could be still some smoke there. As a leader, people may not always say it. Some people play the game, they keep it together, or they might be fine in the moment, but then they go home and talk to their significant others or their family and their friends, and they tell the story, and those people rile them up, right? They might have been good, but they get riled up by somebody else. If you don't close that loop, that rile up or those emotions that were there can start to really have an impact on them moving forward. So come back around, close the loop. It protects, it shows you care, and protects the standard. And some of the questions you might ask while you're closing the loop, after you ask how you're processing it, is, what did you learn from this? How did you see success moving forward? Like, how do you see success moving forward, right? What support do you need now? Right? We dealt with the situation. What support do you need now? This says that, hey, I understand. We have this situation. I got your back. What do you need? Right? Because the standard going to stay the same. And this is my 3-step process for how to use managerial courage, right? Or courageous leadership, right? Number 1, be curious. Number 2, at the end of the day, you got to say what's being said and let it sit. And number 3, you close the loop to care for the human, still care for the human, and hold the standard. Both can be true. Both have to be true, right? And now, why is this so important? This is so important because there's a book, and I'm giving an example. There's a book called The Body Keeps Score. And I believe that like the organization keeps score as well. And the organization keeps score by simply, how does the leader show up when drama happens or when challenges happen? Yes, the goal is to create a business without any fires in it. But as you grow and you have a successful business, new problems are going to be created naturally simply because the business is growing, right? And we talk about that all the time. Does the business outgrow the leader, the people? Do you need more people on the team? Do you need more leaders on the team? The complexity, does the clientele base change? Do you need to scale and grow the business by going to a different clientele? So all these things are true. But as a leader, how you show up in a time of adversity, how you show up in a time where something's hard or the fire, engulfs the business, how you show up is how the body of that business, if you will remember. Like that book, it talks about the body keeps score of the trauma experiences we have. Your business DNA will keep score of how you showed up as a leader. So make sure you show up courageously. Even if you don't make the right choice, the fact if you go through it, you go through the process, people see you stepping in, and people seeing you pulling the data, you being curious, and you saying what needs to be said based on the information that you had, people will respect you and honor you for it. And so that's something I'm going to leave you with. Here is the last reflection questions, which is, I always like to do, what might you be ignoring? Where might you be ignoring smoke in your organization right now? Just a question for you. Where might you be ignoring smoke in the organization right now? And number 2, what conversation might require managerial courage this week? I'm going to challenge you. Go out there this week. What conversation, right, might require managerial courage that you've been holding off on? So with that being said, I want to thank you again so much. I am Coach T. Thank you for being a part of the the Leader You're Becoming podcast, where our goal is simple: to help you create a workplace environment that people love to go to every day and they don't hate their job, right? And at the end of the day, if you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, send it to your friends, hit that subscribe button. I trust you know if this was most valuable to you and to others. So thank you so much. Love y'all. God bless. Until next time. Peace.